Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
If there was one advantage to be found with a litter of direwolf cubs between them, it was that not even Robb's mislike could descend to accusations. Or at least that's what Lyanna assumed when her older brother delightedly cuddled with each of the newborn direwolves, showing a distinct fondness for the silvery-gray-colored firstborn, with nary a glare in Willas' direction. Sir Garland looked torn between amusement and worry at how the Starklings treated such dangerous beasts, though nothing could compare to his open-mouthed disbelief when Lyanna praised her betrothed for delivering them. The brunette knight had been delighted to hear of her acceptance, though, and embraced her warmly to the family. Lyanna still felt pleased when she recalled that bastards were a shame to anyone's family, so even if she had persuaded another man to marry her, she would have worried of his kin's reaction. Knowing that Willas' closest brother regarded her well was a balm to her soul, even if she knew the truth of her birth. They stayed an hour longer to be persuaded to a plan that walked the line between madness and brilliance, and a half-hour more, to allow the siblings time to ride away. Robb hadn't been pleased at the revelation of her birth. Lyanna decided to tell him alone. For now, but strangely, he accepted the Tyrell's plans with more aplomb than she did. Knowing that they had a motive to assure her safety gave him more peace of mind than it did her, as he didn't share her faith in Willas' affection. He was even more pleased to receive reassurance that neither planned to act without Lyanna's acceptance. It wouldn't be forthcoming, as the dark-haired girl couldn't conceive of a situation where she would advocate war. Of course, with direwolf pups in their arms and the mother wolf, dubbed Sage by the eldest Stark, trailing silently behind them, secrecy wasn't probable. The guards had been shell-shocked when the two eldest Starks appeared, and certainly quite frightened by the warhorse-sized direwolf. Their father hadn't been impressed, though she thought there may have been a glimmer of wonder in Ned Stark's eyes when he saw Sage and the pups, and thoroughly scolded them in the Great Hall. Arya escaped punishment, despite the suspicion of her hysteria around the time when Robb and Lyanna disappeared, but the eldest two had not. They were confined to the castle and their lessons for the next moon, though Lyanna doubted she would fulfill even a quarter of her punishment. The dark-haired girl accepted it meekly nonetheless, and swore to the most well-behaved, obedient daughter any father or uncle could ask for during her remaining time as a Snow. Fortunately, they had been allowed to keep the direwolf pups, interred in a separate pen from the hounds, despite Lady Stark's protests. Each of the siblings had felt drawn to one of their own, and while Lyanna couldn't speak for their own reactions, she had spent hours smuggling her work to the stables where she could sit on the hay, complete her writings, and be near to Ghost. She may have also fled to the stables to escape Sansa's maddening grin when she confirmed the wedding. Her sister had started spouting about ladies-in-waiting and Highgarden and trousseaus with such enthusiasm that every other Starkling, and Theon, had decided to carefully run away. It was now, though, shortly before her kidnapping, that Lyanna resolved to speak to another she-wolf that had also run away to be wed. "It's not the same, though, is it, Ghost?" The dark-haired girl decided that emotional support would be necessary for such a talk, but hadn't quite the confidence to bring Robb into this. "Neither of us are promised to others as they were." The hand-sized wolf merely paused in her helpless gnawing, as her teeth hadn't yet grown in of the weirwood amulet to lick her wrist. There was a space between where her gloves met her sleeve that left a strip of pale skin free, and Ghost rubbed her wet nose into it comfortingly. Lyanna made a small squeal of surprise and moved it away, yet still smiled at the adorable offering. She allowed Ghost to continue her efforts on the simple circular amulet carved off of a weirwood branch that would be the Snow's offering to her mother today. "Winter roses brought her happiness and tragedy both, but neither are mine to give." She hadn't ever seen a picture of the Silver Prince before, but Lyanna imagined a tall, fair man with silver-honed hair and violet eyes much like her own. "I cannot claim any flowers that you may have loved, mother. So I bring you a talisman of the old gods that any northerner could be proud of." The old tongue was lost to the northern keeps today, but a precious few words survived. Lyanna had painstakingly carved sorrow, remembrance, love, joy, and sunlight into this one, Her lack of skill shone in the rough etches and unbalanced lettering. The last one was the most common. While the Septons may chide their followers into proper behavior with fear of flames, the Northerners embraced the dream of an afterlife filled with warmth and plenty. Heaven looks a lot like Highgarden. The dark-haired girl fiddled with the wistful thoughts of bringing a few of her siblings southwards with her. Sansa and Arya could be a part of her retinue. The former would blossom in the courts, while the latter rejoiced in tourneys far and wide. Bran too would find delight traversing the library or the sparring yards. Mayhaps I can speak to Willas about it later. The next they spoke, she would be reciting wedding vows. They wouldn't be the simple ones she longed to speak before a weirwood tree, but Lyanna had accepted that. Her children were to be born into the cradle of the faith, and the she-wolf refused to risk their inheritance with a marriage the Southrons would refuse to recognize. A hybrid ceremony incorporating both traditions as her parents had followed would be better, but she wasn't in such a position to take that risk. Lyanna's musings on weddings, marriage and future children were interrupted when she reached the floor holding Lords Rickard and Brandon Stark and Lady Lyanna Stark. The flame in her torch wavered when she drew it higher, casting a tall man's face in bright relief and smothering the spike of fear that chilled down her back. "Father!" Ned Stark blinked the light away, stepping back and nodding towards the curved iron bands that held the torches up on the walls. "Lyanna, what are you doing here?" He looked at her arms and, not finding the customary book that would suggest more illicit reading, focused on the amulet. "Are you here to visit someone?" Aunt Lyanna. Strangely enough, she felt shy in speaking those words. Lyanna Stark was her mother. She was here to visit her mother. I brought an amulet from the old gods. May I see it?" There was no understanding the emotion on Ned Stark's face. There was sadness, yes, but something else inexplicable and worrying. Lyanna silently handed her amulet over. Her father or uncle, but he would always be a father to her, read them aloud. "Your words are fitting. I had thought she would like them." Lyanna hugged Ghost closer to herself self-consciously. The little pup bit her wrist in displeasure and she weakened the grasp. "Are you here to visit her too?" "I am." The Stark Lord stepped aside and allowed her to stand next to him. In the light of two torches, Lyanna's face was easy to perceive. She was no great beauty, as Lady Ashara or Queen Cersei were purported to be, but her slightly rounded face radiated vivacity and kindness. This stone worker had done a remarkable job, as the Lady Lyanna looked frozen in merriment, a heartbeat away from stepping down and drawing one into a dance within the pools of light within the Wolfswood. Her father spoke of his dead sister rarely, but something stirred a few words from him today. "I visit her as often as I can so that she knows she's not alone or forgotten. More than anything else, Lyanna hated to be alone. Different from I then, for I crave my silence each day and would be disheartened without it. She would be glad that you were to visit her then. I, and for you as well." A shadow of a smile crossed Ned Stark's face. It was a jape amongst us brothers that Lyanna would grow an old maid with her wildness. She would always rejoin that it wasn't a future so fraught, as she would have many nieces and nephews to console her. Uncle Benjen would have been a great disappointment then. Mayhaps not. She would have an excuse to visit the wall then. Father forbid her from doing so when she was alive, as it was not a ladylike place to be. He sent her to Riverrun for a year instead. Did she enjoy it? If her mother had been like Arya, then a year in the company of her future good sister, the most proper Lady Catelyn, wouldn't have pleased Lyanna Stark more when she discovered how many hiding spots there were to jump out and scare the other ladies from. Lyanna tried not to laugh as Ned Stark affected a most disapproving cast. Her mother had indeed been like Arya. It made it easier to picture the woman she was kin to and to desire her to be alive. "I wanted to visit the crypt since I don't think I would have many chances to in the future." "And why would that be? You're always welcome in Winterfell, Lyabel, you know this." "I know." She contemplated a proper reply to this that wouldn't reveal the kidnapping to occur. "It takes a moon's time to travel to Highgarden by road, and I wouldn't be able to make such a trip often." This led her father to turn directly towards her. Sir Laura's. Liara's cheeks reddened, but she refused to elaborate. Would you mind if I were to live there? While unhappy to lose you, I would be pleased if you were to find a husband even half deserving for you. Ned Stark confirmed. He placed his arm around her shoulders, drawing her into a comfortable embrace. I will encourage as many visits as possible, though. I know. Liara hesitated. Do you think I'm worthy for it? A marriage to House Tyrell. The arm tightened. You're worthy of any match in the world, Liara Bell. Always remember that. Samwell Tarly ducked his head down as one of the Highgarden guards walked by, holding the scroll in his hands with such practiced nonchalance that it worked against its intended purpose. The Tarly had been ordered by Lord Willas to place this in the Queen of Thorns' hands. He hadn't been brave enough to protest at the time, but had somehow mustered the courage to accomplish it now, though he was still torn on whether it was courage or elation that compelled him forth. By the next moon, I'll be running laps in the courtyard again. He chuckled. It wasn't that he relished in physical exertion, but Sam was gleeful at the prospect of seeing his best friend again. And not as a bastard, but as the wife of a future Lord Paramount. We can read through the spring catalogue. House Tyrell ordered books directly from the Citadel thrice a year. Family and senior servants would read through the catalogue and mark their preferences, compiling a list that Lord Willas would review, approve, and authorize the gold for. Sam had been surprised when he was offered a chance to join the servants this year, as his employment had only spanned 3 moons thus far, but when the man admitted to his choice of bride, the Tarly understood. After I finished accusing him of toying with her emotions anyway. The plump boy cringed at his memory of the event. Willas Tyrell far exceeded him, socially, politically, and financially, and it was likely only his erstwhile friendship with the bastard girl that caught the Rose Lord's eye, that Sam hadn't been punished for his harsh words. Not that he could have helped it. He may be craven, but Liara had been his first friend. They were of like mind and interest, and Sam wouldn't have tolerated her dishonor any more than he would his sister's. The Tyrell had eventually waylaid his concerns, with short remarks on letters, bride prices, and kidnappings. For your sake, my lord, I hope these kidnappings are of a willing nature, for Lady Liara's talent in swordsmanship far exceeds her skill in joust. Sam had been slapping his hand against his mouth and muttering apologies furiously, when his future liege lord broke into laughter over his words. To his surprise, the man fully agreed with him. To his further surprise, Lord Willas Tyrell sounded almost admiring when he commented favorably on Liara's talent. The plump boy had known of his involvement in the tourney, of course, but it seemed a jape amongst the Tyrell siblings then. Now it seemed to foretell a husband all but encouraging Liara's high-spirited behavior, even as a wife and not a maiden to be courted. With anyone else, Sam would have doubted Willa's motivations. Yet he had been involved in the compilation of sums to calculate the bride price. He knew how tenuous the situation in the north would be. He also knew that Lord Willas wasn't so foolish as to disregard his responsibilities to that realm should he marry a Lord Paramount's daughter, bastard or otherwise. If he was willing to undertake those responsibilities regardless, well, Lady Liara would wed him for home if nothing else. And after Sam dispelled his brief fear that he would be forgotten as his friend ascended the ranks of nobility, Liara simply wasn't like that. He was ecstatic. He would see his best friend every day. Now to ensure that it should occur, Lord Willas was a braver man than he. Sam didn't think he could muster the courage to defy Lady Olenna quite like this. Master Samwell, the formidable man clad in grey chainmail and a forest green cloak, inquired. There were 2 such men standing each on the side of the door, and they were the ones most often to accompany the Queen of Thorns. Lady Olenna is currently having tea. I understand, but Lord Willas requested that this be turned to Lady Olenna's hand personally. Sam lifted the scroll with its specialized green rose wax seal. Lord Mace used a gold version of the same. Can you not do it at a later time? The same guard asked. It would be preferable to do so now. My belongings have been packed for a brief trip to survey one of the Tyrell businesses. I'll ask the lady if she's able to see you now. One man stepped to the side to partially disfigure his glimpse inside as the other slipped into the room. He heard a creaky voice loudly demand the reason for the guard's presence, followed by some indistinct grumbling and then a voice that made him jump. "Well, are you planning to wait till I turn to dust? Come in, boy." Sam obediently followed the second guard through. The room he entered was quite beautiful. Walls were painted a peach color, touched off by blue and gold silk banners against the wall, and a deep, burgundy-stained wooden floor. A portrait of a handsome woman surrounded by 3 children and a golden-haired man took the center of the mantel. Around them were many others of grandchildren, the full red wine fleet at sea, Highgarden at sunrise, and a bed of flowers with newborn foals. There were a bevy of fresh-cut flowers placed in white wave-painted blue vases and a bar to the side of the room, loaded high with bottles of wine. Comfortable chairs and sofas surrounded a table laid heavy with buttery warm cakes and delicate sugar-spun confectionaries. An elegantly dressed old woman looking at the cusp of the stranger's door took the highest chair. She squinted at him with eyes that he was fairly certain worked fine. "Who the 7 hells are you? No, wait, don't tell me. You're the new assistant that my grandson took pity on, aren't you? Hobber or Dickon or Desmond or some such thing." "Samwell, my lady." He raised the scroll. "Lord Willas wanted me to bring—" Yes, I heard you from the door." Lady Olenna gestured to the remainder of the room, occupied by many tittering young ladies that Sam ignored from great experience. A scroll important enough for a specific messenger, but not so important that he couldn't give it to me before he left. "Somehow I suspect that you're taking the fall for a spot of trouble that my grandson's gotten himself into." "Lord Willas hadn't remembered to give you the scroll before he left, Lady Olenna. He sent a raven requesting that I pass it on myself. I'm 69, Samwell, and I have a mind sharp enough to remember such little tasks. My grandson takes after me, so any claims he has of faulty memory are a weak deflection at best." The woman snorted and then held her hand out imperiously. "Go on then, give me my grandson's scroll." The Tarly handed it over and watched as Lady Olenna flicked it open and then read through the scroll in one glace. "Book pages, how delightful," she stated boredly. "Tell me, Samwell, do we have this text in our library? We should have a copy of any text written after 270 AC, my lady, and many from before those years," Sam reported. "Would you like me to bring you the book? I'll find someone else to get it." She waved it off. "You're leaving soon to look into Willa's business?" "Yes, my lady. There are some conflicting reports from Harvest Hall that Lord Willas ordered me to look into." "He's not having much of a vacation, is he?" Olenna observed dryly. "I pray for a swift journey then." As the assistant hastily responded to the dismissal, he didn't notice the woman making a sharp gesture to her personal guard. When Samwell Tarly left westward rather than northwards the next day, a discreet rider followed behind. "The arch should be of yellow and white roses, but I'd like a darker stain to hold them. Bring me oak." "Add 10 more chairs to the arrangement and change the white carpet to a dark green one. I want it to trail straight to the dais." "Why haven't the handfasting bands been anointed in oil yet? I ordered those done weeks ago." Marguerite Tyrell was simply in her element as she strode across the courtyard of one of her brother's secondary castles in Greenshield. Leafguard was a small, tidy keep, purchased by Willa's concern over the strong fleet situated at the Shield Islands and fortified to the stranger's teeth by loyal men. They were of a younger sort, those that hadn't yet learned of grandmother's power, and were beholden to the Tyrell heir for their livelihoods. Her brother had chosen the men with assiduous care, authorized a generous budget, and even brought Garland's friend, Heir Maribin Chester, into the marriage conspiracy, if not the Targaryen one. The identity of the lucky bride hadn't been shared, nor, for many, that a wedding would even occur, but as the sept shaped up, people drew their own conclusions. The brunette had been amused by the few rumors to reach her ear. The bride or groom, on the occasions where Marguerite was considered the to-be-wed Tyrell, was anyone from a Lyseni whore to a red priestess to a bastard daughter of Prince Oberyn. One guard was even insisting that Princess Miachella Baratheon had fallen madly in love with Sir Loras and had run away to marry him in defiance of their family's enmity. Marguerite was impressed by that one. The man lacked true names alone. It wasn't the gossip, the finery, or the plots that enthused Marguerite, though, so much as that she was the one in charge. Her brother had left everything in her most willing hands, and while planning an intimate yet appropriately decadent wedding in secrecy was a challenge, she was most certainly capable of the task. She exulted in it even as everyone from the dock workers bringing in the specially ordered goods to the ladies-in-waiting burning candlelight to sew a Tyrell cloak, answered to her. The thrill of power was addictive. Gods, no wonder Willas loved bossing everyone around. And no wonder he is constant complaint of subpar subordinates. Margaery sighed. If they refuse to part for the silk ones without names, then purchase them in plain linen. We'll embroider them ourselves if we should have to. The elderly steward turned pallid at the borderline heretical talk, but Lady Asepta the brunette mentally flicked through a list of her female cousins. Order Tyanna to my solar and ready her trunk for Old Town. It doesn't take too long to recite the vows for an Anaileach, does it? No, Lady, it does not. Then she'll stray after the handfastings are embroidered. Ready a small pouch of alms in case we need to smooth matters along at the starry sept. As Lady wishes. From the crab pots we have readied a few recipes for Lady's tasting. Will Lady be free this evening? Margaery confirmed that she would be, and then internally wilted over a dinner spent on seafood. She had never cared for the taste of crustacean. Truly the sacrifices I make for Willa's sake. Will he be the one to wed then? Mira Forrester inquired softly from behind her. The dark-haired northerner had been the one selected to take notes on her behalf, as she was less given to guile and gossip than most of her handmaidens. She was also one of the few not smitten with Laura's. This was an advantage when the others were trailing hopelessly after the brunette, begging to know that her most comely brother was to be spared marriage. I had thought you did not care either way. I am interested, Mira admitted, as we all are, but I asked to spare Leonette further heartbreak. Margaery blinked wide, luminous, dough-shaped eyes at the other girl. They were her best feature in her own opinion, as they lacked the intensity Willas held and the amusements that Garland's fell to. Laura's appeared sly, though he was least given to their games. Tragically, Mira maintained the frank innocence of her people and merely blinked back. Yet another day that the Forrester girl would not follow her to bed then. Garland will not be wed today, Margaery answered. She hadn't thought Leonette so invested in her brother, though the dainty lady would make a good match. There had been some note in Willa's letters to keep an eye on her, had there not? We shall have to hasten preparations. It will take little over a fortnight before Willas brings his bride here. Mira had a knack for geography, and it did not take her long to work out the first hint. Lord Willas is marrying a lady outside of the Reach. A second later, and Lord Willas is marrying. Margaery tapped a finger playfully against her lips and they fell to silence. Mira contemplated the hint further as Margaery surveyed the glass gardens and ordered the flowers, then hurried to the outer bailey to ensure the Tyrell banners furled and ready to drop. They were at the wine cellar and the brunette was ensuring the quality and quantity of the drinks at hand when Mira spoke. Lord Willas is wedding outside of the Reach. Margaery hummed distractedly, deciding to order another 2 casks of mulled beer. His bride wouldn't be approved of by Lord and Lady Tyrell, so he does so in secret. Margaery wiped down a tin cup with a clean rag and then poured herself a sip of the Arbor vintage. They travel by ship to the Shield Islands. A fortnight is too far for the Westerlands. This one shall do. I wonder if I can import some of their northern spirits before the wedding. The bride is from a house in the Riverlands, the North, or Dorne. Margaery nodded in satisfaction. This vintage would do fine. We can have casks of northern ale travel down by the crossings in a fortnight, can't we? Lord Willas is marrying a lady of the North, Mira stated in disbelief. Wait. The only northern lady to visit Highgarden in the last year was... Ignoring the blatant astonishment on the other lady's face, Margaery patted her cheek fondly. We'll make a schemer of you yet, Mira. Lady Lyanna Snow. Lord Willas will wed Lady Lyanna Snow. After the effort I've gone to in preparing this, he better, Margaery sniffed. Softening the arrogance in her tone, she offered a ladylike splay of hands in hapless wonder. He's in love with her. If she had declared Lady Lyanna's true heritage, she would not have received a look of such surprise as this did. She pulled at Mira's cheek in protest. Her brother was distant and aloof. "Not heartless. I do hope it's not catching," Margaery added, batting her eyelashes. There was something rather fetching about her northern charm. "I had only seen Lady Lyanna a handful of times, but she truly is a beauty," the Forester agreed in surprised sweetness. "I hope she and Lord Willas will have many happy years together." Sadly, not even Margaery's optimism could parlay that into a bedding. On the 7th day of the 7th month, approximately 297 years since Aegon's conquest, the last trueborn princess of House Targaryen was pushed off of the bed. Lyanna tumbled off with a most unladylike grunt, her curls snarling around her head in messy knots, as she folded her arms to brace against the chill of even the rug-covered floor. The culprit of this heinous crime sniffed haughtily in response and then fixed icy blue orbs on her. "Up, now." Sansa waved a brush threateningly in the air, nudging her older sister with her toe as the dark-haired girl fruitlessly tried to roll away. "We have to get you ready. For my kidnapping." Lyanna snarked, pushing herself into a sitting position and looking forlornly at her bed. Ghost had poked her head up from the pillows, drowsily looking around the room with blood-ruby eyes before sticking her snout back under the blanket. "Lucky pup. Is this really necessary?" Kidnapping is no excuse not to look your best," Sansa chastised. "It frightens me that my sister isn't japing," Lyanna thought. She allowed the red-haired girl to pull her up to her feet, violet eyes tracking the room to find that Sansa had already laid out her clothes. The blue gown was of the northern fashion, with a square neckline, long sleeves, and a pleated skirt. The skirt was split up the back to enable a stride rising. The bodice was embroidered with pale pink roses, scrolling downwards to the hem of her skirt, and matched by the sturdy, pink-dyed leather shoes they had bought earlier. "You would make a wonderful lady-in-waiting," she murmured, as her sister pulled out a full bodice instead of her customary chemise from the drawers. Lord Willas mentioned that it was customary for a bride to bring a few ladies of her own to court. "When this settles, if you're not opposed, to see the splendor of Highgarden with my own eyes." Sansa sighed happily, her own eyes shining. "Don't be silly, sister. How could I ever oppose that? When you're there, you can have someone else bring up the water instead." A third voice, snappish, broke in as the door opened. 2 direwolf pups trotted in before Arya could lug the full bucket through. "We couldn't heat enough water for the bath. A cold wash is fine." Lyanna grinned over from where she stood against the wall as Sansa expertly untied the strings of her dress. "Thank you for bringing it up here, Arya." Her little sister shrugged unconcernedly. "You only get kidnapped once." "I should hope," Lyanna whispered back, lips quirking upwards. "Sansa and I were speaking of the Southron tradition to bring ladies-in-waiting to court. You're still young, but perhaps you can foster for a year or two in Highgarden." "Will I have to wear a dress?" "Sometimes. You'll have to dance, attend balls, and behave mannerly around the court too." Arya considered the offer in all seriousness. "It sounds terrible, but I love you too much to say no. I'll have to see if I can arrange a swordsmanship lesson for her as well. It would have to be more discreet than when she was a mere bastard visiting Highgarden, but even as a lady, her practice sessions would continue." Willas had merely asked that she do so less publicly, as even when known that the Lady of Highgarden was a swordswoman, most courtiers would prefer to avoid reminders. Lyanna felt that perplexing medley of anticipation, fear, and delight as her mind skittered towards her future role. She was leaving Winterfell. She was going to be married. The dark-haired girl bit her lip sharply, trying not to break into breathless giggles over the fact. Her composure was broken when she saw the expression on Sansa's face, a wide smile as she read her own, and then the air was filled with 2 mutual rings of laughter. Arya merely shook her head in silent grief over the insanity that her sisters had so tragically fallen to. "If this is a sign of love, then I wish to never be married," the youngest Stark in the room declared. "I'm certain that there's some handsome man out there that will change your mind," Sansa teased. Leagues away and in the Dornish sands, Edric Dane sneezed. "And I'm certain that there is not." Arya shot back. Edric Dane sneezed thrice more in quick succession as the Stark sisters wondered aloud whether he would be honorable and gentle, if he had the courage to court Arya, and, from the girl in question, the basis of his existence. He rubbed his nose and waved away Lord Beric's concern that he was coming down with a cold. With 2 hands to help her, even a pair as unenthused and inexperienced as Arya's, the dark-haired girl was soon dressed for the day. She eschewed the customary fur cloak for a thinner wool coat of an undistinguished gray that rode down past her hips. Her thick curls were pulled into a loose updo, a few strands falling free to be pushed away from light violet eyes. Around her wrist was clasped the silver bracelet, at her ears Sansa's plain silver studs. Lyanna put her foot down when it came to painting her face, but allowed the middle Stark sister to massage a pine-scented cream on her sweet milk skin. "You look lovely, Lya," Arya said admiringly. "I'm certain that Robb and Theon will be pleased." "It does seem overmuch when Lord Willas won't even be present," Lyanna admitted. The Rose Lord hadn't wanted his disability to slow their escape, thus arranging for his brothers to kidnap her in his stead. Not that it would be all that scandalous an account when Robb and Theon were similarly brought along by the Tyrells. "No excuses," Sansa insisted. "Arya, did you finish the letters last night? Signed, folded, and sealed. They're all hidden under Robb's bed. Bran can get them later." "All right." The red-haired girl clapped her hands together. "Regarding the snow with misty eyes. This is it then, you're to be wed." "I am." Lyanna leaned down and pressed a kiss to her cheek. "Thank you, sister. I'll write you as soon as I am able. Will reply." Arya was careful of her dress as she leaned in for her own gentle embrace. "You can tell us all of married life, and we'll tell you of the punishments father will give us when he finds out." While the words were teasing, Lyanna still offered an apologetic smile. "I'll send gifts. You'll need to. If Rickon learns that he gave up his favorite storyteller without at least a half-dozen more toys, he'll be most vexed." Sansa smirked. "Can't have that now, can we?" Arya tugged at her loose curl. "Be happy, Lya. Father will be furious for anything less. He'll be angry regardless." Lyanna winced. "We're acting behind his back and faking a kidnapping." After what happened with Aunt Lyanna, the dark-haired girl's words trailed off. She knew the truth of the incident. Unlike her sisters, after the almost disastrous second proposal from the honey-haired Tyrell, Lyanna had informed Robb of it alone and still believed her decision to be the sensible one, but now desired a sister to speak to. Someone to reassure her that fleeing to a Southron lord's arms wasn't as impetuous and dangerous a path as when her mother traversed it. "This isn't anything like Aunt Lyanna," Sansa scolded hotly. "You're leaving willingly to marry a man you love." As she did, Lyanna mused. Her youngest sister piped up then with more reassuring words. "I doubt the fat flower has the stomach to set either father or Robb aflame," Arya added. "Nor will any spurned man declare war for your hand. Even Torrhen Karstark could not be so enamored of you." "The poor man," Sansa sighed with a rather insincere regret. In her mind, anguished suitors merely added to the romance of Lyanna's marriage. Within the rules of song and story, it was only right that a maiden as beautiful as her sister would leave a trail of broken hearts behind her. "Oh, stop acting like you care." Arya rolled her eyes. "You should be more worried that Lyanna's kidnapping will keep you from getting a suitor." Concern suddenly swept across high cheekbones and river-blue eyes. Sansa Stark was lovely. More so, she knew of her beauty and expected suitors of her own to vie for her hand when Ned Stark allowed them to. She accepted that her older sister would be first to wed, but expected that, once everything was said and done, her chance would come. The thought that the implicit promise given to all true-born noble daughters, of splendid balls and intricate gowns and gallant husbands, would be taken from her was worrisome. "When father finds out," Arya said gleefully, "he will lock us in a tower, guarded by a pack of direwolves for all time to keep a second daughter from running away." Sansa stared at her sister, mouth agape. Lyanna took one look at that expression and suddenly burst into a coughing fit. Arya maintained her smirk, unknowingly mimicking her deceased uncle, all until the red-haired Stark swatted her across the head. "You're impossible," the blue-eyed girl declared. She took one look at the mirth on the eldest girl's face and broke into a smile of her own. "I hope the man you'll marry is good at climbing towers then." Back in Starfall, Edric Dane sneezed again. Theon Greyjoy had staged his own rebellion. It wasn't the grand affair that his father's had been, with an armada of kraken-sailed ships cutting through sea and salt, but neither did it splinter and burn in a black-and-gold blaze of royal fury. It was a small thing, 8 years ago, ripped from his sister's arms after losing brothers and uncles, and nearly his own life to Euron Greyjoy's matte black blade, to accept Robb Stark's hand. It was a defiance of his role as hostage, as helpless to his own fate as any of the thralls in the Iron Islands had been, to befriend his captor. Not that the auburn-haired boy with his silent, violet-eyed shadow evoked the image of the man to slit Theon's throat should his father rebel, but it appealed to his sense of the dramatic. Theon had cried. Theon had raged. Theon had fell to a mute stupor at the loss, but in the end, Theon took the only means of resistance available to him. He made a friend. Well, he made 2 friends. Theon hadn't thought all that highly of Lyanna Snow at the beginning, but where Robb went, his bastard half-sister would follow. The two had been as thick as thieves from, according to the servants' gossip, the day Lord Stark rode into Winterfell with a swaddled babe in the following wheelhouse. She had been put into the child's playroom playing quietly with her straw doll when the blue-eyed boy had toddled in. Supposedly, the Stark heir had lit up at the presence of a new playmate, glomped on and refused to let go. Eventually, Lyanna had stopped crawling away from him, and the two shared an enclosed friendship that hadn't been breached until Theon arrived. The squid hadn't understood the exceptional nature of his friendship until years after the fact. Still, Theon felt a perverse glee knowing that befriending the Stark children and enjoying his time at Winterfell ran counter to the suffocating life of a hostage that the Lannister lord wanted. It was petty revenge, but he was pleased nonetheless. He was even more pleased that Lyanna was to wed the Tyrell heir now. Not just because it would make his friend happy and Theon was pleased for her. Truly, even it meant having to deal with Robb's bellyaching for the next few moons, but because it was a marriage of great houses. Theon's education in politics was limited, but he wasn't an idiot. The last dynasty fell because the dragons had been stupid enough to allow the Riverlands, the North and the Stormlands to be wed in alliance, all overlooked by a fostering of Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon at the Eyrie. It was a coalition powerful enough to bring down the royal family, and this one, tying the Reach and the North together, could prove equally dangerous. Theon didn't actually think that would happen, of course. Ned Stark was too loyal a man to betray the crown, and besides, there were no viable replacements for the Stag King. No, it wouldn't come to anything at all, but even the possibility would keep Tywin Lannister up at night, and the thought of the blasted Lion Lord getting worry-born ulcers made Theon feel all warm and mushy inside. Theon didn't miss Roderick or even Meryn, but he couldn't forget the kick a man in Lannister red aimed at Asha, nor the Lion Lord's cold eyes, as he advocated for the permanent death of House Greyjoy. And there would be sailing involved. Theon was always pleased when there was sailing involved. "Here, let me take this," Robb offered, already stepping up to grab the leather satchel from his sister's hand. The dark-haired girl softly shushed him and placed it over her chest, the strap caught between her pert breasts and briefly highlighting the sight before a cloak covered it. It was a thin bag meant for 2 or 3 dresses alone, with the remainder of her trousseau brought south after the marriage. With any luck, they'll have to be sailed down and I can join again, Theon mused. Ready then, of course. Lyanna hadn't the look of a bride-to-be in her simple cloak, but those eerie silver-violet eyes were bright in expectation. Years of friendship hadn't soothed his unease with the unnatural shade, nor was it to be soothed by the blood-eyed pup trotting at her feet. He hadn't been the least bit surprised when Robb told him of his sister's suicidal coaxing of a mother direwolf. "I don't know what Robb is so worried for. Now Lyall have a husband as mad as she is." Lord Stark had taken a day's trip out to Castle Serwyn for the biannual meeting of the Woodsmen, and they decided that none other occasion would prove more fortuitous for the greatest marriage scandal of their lifetimes. Excuses had been made for an early morning ride, provisions secreted away by the surprisingly talented pickpocket Arya underfoot, and steeds chosen for their endurance and speed. Even Theon, who hadn't any affection for the beasts, could admire his own. A tall destrier of black hair and fleet foot, it was the sort of mount that any Southron knight could be proud of. Unexpectedly, Robb offered to lift his equally talented sister up to the saddle. Even more rare, Liera allowed this gallantry, nervously smiling over to the castle doors where the other Starklings awaited. Her white-furred pup, aptly named Ghost, was bundled up amongst silken scraps and rawhide bones in the saddlebag, more than content once a milk-drenched rag was put within Jaw's reach. Theon casually brought up the state of trapping last Senite, exasperated to find that the guards were attuning to the strange melancholy in the air. The Starks had no talent for deception. It was meant to be a simple morning ride, nothing more. And yet Rickon was already sniffling into Sansa's quickly dampening skirts. Liking your siblings so much, Theon decided, cannot be healthy. They rode out of the big gates of Winterfell and down familiar, well-trodden paths before the castle became a visible but indistinct smudge in the horizon. Once there, Robb made an abrupt turn to the west, alongside the trees of the Wolfswood, over towards Torrens Lake and past that, the unnamed rivers that would lead down to the Salt Spear. It would be over Barrowland and straddling the line to the Rills, Theon knew, to reach the western shore before nightfall. It was a point of pride and pain that Theon could ride so well. They hadn't many horses in the Iron Islands, as the land wouldn't suffice for extensive grazing. As the son of Balon Greyjoy, he'd partaken in a few lessons as a child, but the hardy ponies favored there hadn't held a candle to the ones in Winterfell. Unlike most Ironborn, Theon could ride well. He could shoot too. While not outright derided in the islands, longbows were considered the bent of less courageous men. And in all the years he'd spent here, it would be strange if he hadn't drawn some affection for the land. If so, Theon wouldn't speak of heavy mists, hilly scrabland or ancient pines to the people he was to one day rule. It's a hard, proud land, full of hard, proud people. A trickle of amusement ran down his spine as he saw the instinctive, unmindful competition between his friends. Every now and then, Robb's horse would move ahead to lead the party, soon to be supplanted by a, to all evidence incognizant Liera. Robb wouldn't allow his sister to hold point for long, and the cycle would begin all over again. Tempted as he was to join them, Theon allowed the two siblings a last bit of fun before Liera wed. Wonder how pretty those Southron ladies could get. Theon intended to bed one if the opportunity presented itself. Liera's bookish lord supposed to have a beauty for a sister, isn't he? Comeliness tended to run in families, of course, and Lord Willas Tyrell was supposed to be rather fair himself. Theon wasn't sure if he should credit such rumors. Love had clearly driven the wolf maiden to madness, so any accounts she gave were suspect, and Robb preferred looking tragically over maps of Westeros to discussing his faraway good brother. Then again, Liera's not one to lie. Theon's eyes widened to uncomfortable proportions when he saw the two dark blue-clad riders awaiting them a mile away. His eyes were as sharp as an archer's needed to be, but it wasn't as though the two put any effort into hiding, out there in the open like that. The second knight's prettier than my sister. The golden-curled, blue-eyed Ponce had to be prettier than Liera too, though Theon wasn't quite reckless enough to voice the comment. He had kissed a boy before the novelty attracted him. The cheap wine and hoots from the whores spurred him on, but Theon had eventually settled that he found little physical attraction in men. I may have to reconsider for this one. The less attractive knight was speaking now, so Theon abandoned his brief side-eyed fantasy to focus. We'll be leading you to the ship, Lord Garland, and that must be his name from the similarity to both the startlingly attractive male and the descriptions Theon had heard of Lord Willas said. My cousins Horas and Hobber have sailed it north and shall take us down to Greenshield. Are they aware of the wedding? Robb inquired. They were informed after landing, Garland Tyrell smirked. Suffice it to say they are most eager to meet the Lady Liera. Those words didn't seem to assure Liera any, as the she-wolf's already pale skin turned the chalky white of river agates. Theon would have interfered with a jape, but the blonde knight moved his horse forward, distracting the dark-haired girl with a plea to meet the infamous ghost. Summoned by her name, the blood-eyed beast poked her head out, yawning widely to reveal a row of sharp little teeth that hounds wouldn't yet have grown and a pink tongue. For this she was rewarded with many praises by the knight and an affectionate ear rub by Liera. By the warrior, Garland spoke true. The knight was delighted. You'll have to be careful with this one, Lady Liera. My brother will spoil her senseless if you don't keep a firm hand on him. To my knowledge, it is the husband that is traditionally the disciplinarian, Liera replied, lips curved. My grandmother would disagree. She would claim it a woman's duty to raise children properly before a man could seed any foolish notions to their heads. Lady Olenna has done an utterly splendid job with her own son, of course. To that, she would reply that my father is his own father's son. The knight chuckled. As his wife, the management of my brother's foolish notions will fall to you. Does Lord Willas have any such problems that I should be aware of now? Let's see, Willas won't tell you, but he is absolutely horrid when it comes to increasing his stock. The stables at Highgarden are ever expanding, but when it comes to Mayfairs and tourneys, and such, one must distract my brother before they can sneak away merchandise to sell. Lyanna smiled at him impishly, evidently channeling anxiety into daring. However will I distract him? The knight's responding grin was everything rakish, and Theon was eager to see how much further the two could take this. Well, I have heard excellent things on the matter of trousers, Laura's. Garland intervened, shooting one look at his amused brother, a second at his sheepish but oddly proud soon-to-be sister, and a third at a dismayed Robb Stark. We're now to leave, Lady Lyanna. If you would lend me your ear, I have wedding details to discuss with you. The formation was arranged to allow the dark-haired girl and the second eldest Tyrell to fall back. Briefly observing them assured Theon that his friend felt comfortable with her future good brother, speaking softly and intently about the Southron ceremony arranged. The riders continued forward, past massive trees and small villages, woodcutters, farmers, and the occasional craftsmen, until noon fell. The midday meal was eaten briefly, Theon having a chance to inquire somewhat about sea power in the Reach. This was a subject on which Sir Loras was surprisingly well informed, as his uncle was none other than Lord Paxter Redwine, one of the finest naval commanders in Westeros. They'll have the means to bring the bride price north then. They made better time than by Robb's conservative estimate, none too surprising considering how cautious winter had made the north. The ship had cast anchor well away from the harbor, a boy with reddish-brown hair having rowed a smaller boat near land. Theon saw a gorgeous clinker-built oaken cog with a single sail, steep sides, and if he squinted his sides, a squatter-than-average keel bobbing 1/4 of a meter away. There wasn't any emblem of House Redwine but for the purplish-red, almost wine-colored, dye of the sail. Not that this wasn't impressive in and of itself, as cloth dyed purple and gloss to withstand the storms as this undoubtedly was, could run hundreds of dragons deep. Theon's heartbeat ran wildly. He might quite possibly be in love. Must we travel by ship? Robb asked, pale northern skin tinged faintly green. Beside him Lyanna looked no less apprehensive, though she had the common sense to keep her mouth shut when her husband was the grandson of so famed a naval house. At least her good mother's surname wouldn't harry her thusly. We've made good time on the horses, and it'll be even better by sea, Sir Garland rejoined. Haven't you learnt to swim? In the heated pools of a godswood, yes, Lyanna mumbled. Theon thought of brisk winds, the white foam navigating by sky. You needn't fear, what could possibly go wrong? It could be worse. Robb Stark doubted he would ever love the sea as his friend did. Theon, currently leaning from the crow's nest like a two-copper witless fool, had adjusted quickly to a sailor's gait. Despite that it had been a day and a half out, the auburn-haired boy had yet to accept the lurch of the floor beneath his boots, the tangy salt breeze burning his throat, or sleeping directly under a starlit canopy without trees or any such cover present. The only cabin on the ship had been afforded to Lyanna, as was only proper, so the other men, less than 20 years all, had taken pallets on deck. 2 of those men were sons of House Redwine, and while he had maintained the stoicness his house was famous for before them, Robb was quite vexed. Neither of them had been overtly rude. In fact, their actions could be considered downright solicitous, if not for how they looked at his little sister with expressions of downright perplexion and curiosity. It wasn't an unexpected reaction, and in fact, Robb had felt it a better one for a presumed bastard marrying so highly than scorn. There hadn't been any implications of seduction present, despite the act common to women marrying upwards, possibly because House Stark was widely considered amongst the most prudish house in Westeros. Even then, Robb grated at their treatment of Lyanna as a roadside mummer's show. She handles it with far more grace than I would. Lyanna, who so often spent her life shrinking into the shadows, maintained her poise and cheer around these men now. Robb would have liked to think that it was for his silent support, but he wasn't so foolish. The specter of Willas Tyrell was the one she was drawing strength from now. As Robb admitted sourly, is fitting for her future husband. It was a dark sally in the north that wolves shouldn't venture south of the neck. Robb discarded the words, as one only could when a betrothal was arranged between one's sister and the archetype of a Southron lordling, but these boys made him reconsider. They were a mere sign of the future awaiting Lyanna. Disdain, jealousy, and rumors would follow his sister around for possibly the remainder of life for daring to marry above herself. Even though she's a princess, Robb liked those thoughts even less than these ones. He considered ordering the ship back to shore. The Stark heir was definitely getting cold feet for this marriage business. Then a low yip caught his attention. He looked down. Ghost, the white-furred pup, didn't make another sound, but she did rub her head against his leg. He leaned down to pet her fur, enjoying the soft touch against his palm. Ruby eyes looked up at him reproachfully when he stopped. "You don't want your mistress to be married, do you?" Ghost licked his palm. Robb took this as support. He leapt to his feet. "I'll be mad, but I'm sure if I talk to her first." And then Theon spotted something out in the horizon. "Pirates, better than a bridegroom," Robb muttered, withdrawing his sword and looking around for Lyanna. The dark-haired girl was swiftly divesting herself of her skirt, and dear gods, Sansa had allowed for trousers underneath them and retrieving her own sword. The auburn-haired boy scooped up the white direwolf pup and hurriedly made for his foolish sister. "Absolutely not. I'm not letting you fight alone," Lyanna snapped back, nonetheless accepting the pup and opening the cabin door to shush her in. The pup looked as displeased about it as her mistress. "I forbid it." Robb kept one ear open to another announcement in sheer relief that they were petty pirates and not ironborn raiders from Theon. "Certainly Lord Willas will thank you for it," she bit back. "I'll have to beg his forgiveness afterward. You're not wedded yet, and I'll never be if we don't handle these fools. How are you two still fighting?" Theon shouted down, notching his bow and taking aim. The pirate ship was a sleeker, faster one, skimming through water and pulling up next to them. While the numbers were greater on the other side, the quality was revealed inferior when Theon took first kill. "Attack the goddamn pirates. At least they're not dirty, stinking, no-good ironborn raiders." Hobbar Redwine spit out. Several of the men had jumped aboard, only to face the whirlwind that was simply Sir Garland Tyrell with a sword. Sir Hobbar hadn't quite that talent, but he respectably engaged another man further away. "Hey, I resemble that comment," Theon shouted back before shooting an arrow through another man's eye. Letters, kidnappings, and now pirates. Robb took out his frustration by sidestepping one man and then slicing another, throat through sternum. In his next pass, there was acute surprise present before eyes rolled back and the man crumpled. This was the first man he'd killed, but the auburn-haired boy hadn't more than a moment to absorb that until the next man stepped up and he was back to fighting. That settles it. Sansa and Arya are never to be wed. Ain't you a pretty lass, Og? Lyanna's blade made swift work of that particular fool. Robb stepped on his wrist for good measure. Between Sir Garland Tyrell and, well, mostly Sir Garland. Though they'd all assisted to some measure, the pirates were felled. Blood soaked the deck and Lyanna's beaded bodice, but at least the Redwine twins now looked at her in horrified awe rather than perplexed consideration. Robb took the only good news he could, even as he grabbed his sister by the wrist and handily dragged her to the cabin. He had heard Sir Lora's jest. No sister of his was meeting a Tyrell in trousers ever again. Desmara Redwine had a talent. Any grandchild of Olenna Tyrell cultivated at least one, and if her own was not as impressive as her cousin's, well, Desmara had never the need for such qualities. Willas was interminably clever, Garland fierce and gallant, Margaery gifted a silver tongue, and Lora's utterly charming, but they had all need of those skills as the main branch of House Tyrell. Desmara had no such expectations. She was the youngest child and only daughter of a wealthy house, with a warmly mannered mother and a doting if strict father. There had been no great role cultivated for her, beyond the essential etiquette necessary for life as a reach noblewoman. The one skill that Desmara did have, though, that could exceed any one of her cousins, was a card face that could drive Lord Varys green with envy. Simply put, Lord Paxter Redwine and his wife, Lady Mina Tyrell, had both inherited the silver-sharp tongue of House Redwine that Lady Olenna perfected. Most of their courting had proceeded with each's pleasure at the other's witticisms, and this trend continued into marriage. As the baby of her family, Desmara was often required to sit beside her parents in feasts and other social gatherings. It was inevitable that her parents would fall into sharing quibs and barbs with one another. Likewise, one would not be surprised that Desmara learnt early on the importance of hiding her own humors past a disaffected and pleasant smile. This was the measure by which she greeted Lady Lyanna Snow today. She has such a natural beauty about her, Desmara marveled, falling into a practiced curtsy. Her keen eyes caught the unpolished nature of the one returned to her. Margaery shall have to straighten that pose, more creams and pastes for her skin. It's so delightfully moonlight pale, but she hasn't felt the reach sun yet. Desmara felt a pang of jealousy at that unblemished, sweet milk skin. Her own freckles were a recurring upset for her. "Sister, it's a joy to have you here," Margaery expressed warmly, drawing the younger, dark-haired bastard into an embrace. It seemed genuine too, none of that pert sweetness that her cousin offered to ladies-in-waiting that her position saddled her with. "Willas is already on the island, but I've banished him to his rooms. It's bad luck for the groom to see his bride before the wedding. I hadn't a chance to thank you for everything you've done, Margaery." Desmara gave her credit. Her earnestness wasn't feigned in the least. "Nonsense, it was my pleasure," Margaery assured. "The ceremony shall begin in a few hours. I've set aside a few ladies to assist you into a dress, you needn't worry. I corresponded with Lady Sansa and had it completed for time, but there are still some details to be addressed. I leave you in Cousin Desmara's most capable hands." Her sweet tone was dropped a second later as she turned a sickly smile on Hobber. "Cousin, you and I must speak of the crab shipment." Hobber had the good sense to look afraid as he should. Margaery had not been pleased by his bartering skill as the brunette harried him away. Desmara stepped up to fill her place, offering a placating smile to the nervous but exceptionally pretty bastard standing in front of her. Married, Willas. Desmara was still agog by it all, and she had spent the last se'night preparing the secret ceremony. She had been one of the few to risk her coin on Garland rather than Laura's. As despite any public acclaim, practically everyone in the family was aware of Laura's deep friendship with Lord Renly, but Willas had been a dark horse. Her cousin could be a second Sir Blackfish with how he avoided the prospect, the Sir Blackfish being a recurring figure of ridicule in House Redwine for his former rejection of Aunt Bethany. If nothing else, the bastard's conquest of her eldest cousin, and it couldn't have been seduction. Willas was simply too ruthless and too smart to be ensnared by that one. Some respect from Desmara. Having already made a general curtsy to the party, Desmara turned to offer smaller ones in quick succession to the girl's brother, a handsome boy with auburn hair a few shades darker than her own, and another figure wearing noble's clothes. The Stark heir returned it with a gallant if distracted bow, but the other one, Desmara shivered slightly as her hand was taken, lightly kissed, and then returned to her as the young lord straightened. Those dark eyes bespoke only one word as they lazily made her own acquaintance. Theon Greyjoy, heir of Pike. This one was rakishly handsome, unlike the clear-cut beauty of his friend. A thrill ran down her spine as he offered a sly smile. "Pleasure to meet you." "In you, Lord Theon," Desmara maintained, drawing her hand up slowly along the beaded line of her corset to pull a strand of hair back. The boy's eyes gratifyingly followed the movement. Desmara Redwine of the Arbor. He was rather attractive. Shame he was an Ironborn. Offering one more lustful smile, her nose pricked as the faint scent that memory identified as blood Desmara had been dragged fishing by her father before rose from the party. She gave no mind to it, as pirates had been the hastily offered reason for the delay. Horrors had wisely fed the dead men to their cousin's wrath. "Lady Lyanna, if you should follow me." "Of course." The dark-haired girl stepped forward, revealing a small, white-furred form sitting patiently behind her. Desmara's infamous mask nearly slipped at her sudden desire to coo at the beast. What a lovely creature. A gift from Cousin Willas, perhaps. "Stay here with Rob Ghost, my lady." "Is that a wolf cub?" Mira Forrester asked in all evident astonishment. At those words, Desmara's mask cracked for her own surprise. It was adorable enough as an obedient hound, but wolf. "A direwolf cub," Lady Lyanna corrected with a self-conscious smile. "My siblings and I each have one. Ghost is my companion." "Will he be coming to Highgarden with you?" Desmara asked hopefully. She had never seen a direwolf before, but she wanted to cuddle that one at once. Yes, she will, the bastard confirmed. The red-haired beauty mentally added another notch of respect for that, as well as decided that many qualities must have drawn her cousins to Lyanna Snow. One mark of Margaery's affection for the bastard was the selection of ladies-in-waiting. She had chosen 3 girls alone, no small thing when they included cousin Elinor and herself, to limit Lady Lyanna's exposure to the catty comments of a court displeased with cousin Willa's marriage. Desmara didn't necessarily agree with such. Testing the bastard girl now would ready them to decide if she was worth the binding. Of course, as cousin Willas seemed determined to go through this regardless, and dear gods, if a besotten Willas hadn't been the most terrifying thing Desmara encountered yet, then she supposed it unnecessary. The last member of their intimate party was Margaery's erstwhile attempt at a pillow friend. A fellow northerner, Mira had broken into a pleasant chat of all the glories Highgarden could offer. Certainly more so than the dreary north. Though there would remain a certain charm to one's childhood abode. Elinor threw open the doors of the ladies' room with unnecessary grandeur. Sweeping in with a flourish of skirts and silken brown tresses, her cousin made headway to the straw-stuffed still figure they had worked tirelessly on. Draped over the mannequin was swaths of pale blue fabric, lighter even than the dawnlit sky, more white silk than any notable hue, and as pure as any bride could wish for. They had folded it into a wedding gown exuding simplicity and grace, neither qualities in fashion at the moment, but Elinor's masterpiece was such that it would be a great trend. At least it would have been had the ceremony not been private and the dress resigned to a fateful end at the hands of foolish green boys. The gasp of shock and delight from Lady Lyanna led the girls to preen anyway. It truly was Willas Tyrell's finest work. A shoulderless tube of pale white-blue silk meant to cling to the bride's body leant down to the floor. Over that the ladies had cheerfully drained cousin Willa's pocketbook by importing Myrish lace by the yard. The entire dress from the chest and collarbone, conservatively stitched over in white lace, to the trim was endowed in lace. A recurring rose, leaf, and ivy design of overlapping flowers took a keen eye or a close look to fully appreciate. The full-length sleeves, attached by thin cords of white satin, were done in the same design and made entirely of lace. The train was short, and the veil held by a silver circlet studded in tiny white sapphires. Margaery had shamelessly borrowed the set from her mother's jewelry box, including a delicate necklace, matching set of earrings, and twinned bracelets. White satin slippers completed the look, and the red wine was proud to state that she had stitched the golden rose design on herself. "It's beautiful," Lyanna Snow whispered. "I know," Elinor responded proudly. Remembering that a compliment was to be returned, she belatedly added, "You are beautiful enough to do my work justice." Desmara could have slapped her own face for that remark. Still, the Snow Girl returned it with a quirky, slightly less nervous grin. "My sister Sansa generously allows me to model her work as well." "Good," her cousin said brightly. "You have practice." With those words, the girls dragged her to the other end of the room, where a tub of heated water, scented in rose petals, awaited. Once the admittedly well-made gown of mint green had been stripped of her, Lyanna was unceremoniously pushed into the water, and oils, brushes, and soaps were fetched. Desmara took a moment to admire the sight. Elinor took 2 of limber skin, full breasts, elfin features, and luminous silver-violet eyes. Well, if cousin Willas had to lose his mind, at least he hadn't lost his taste. "Lady Lyanna, I hadn't the pleasure of being in Highgarden at your last visit," Desmara began, gently massaging the oil rose scented again. Did Willas truly have no shame into those springy curls? "But Lady Lyanna could not sing your praises highly enough, and I would dearly like to test her claims. Would you promise me a song when I next visit my fair cousins? While I'm pleased to do so, I fear my voice doesn't boast any great talent." "Nonsense," Mira rebuked. "Sir Garland was brought to tears by your tribute to the Dragon Knight. He was merely dismayed that my hero surpassed his own." Lyanna Snow laughed. It was a husky sound but mirthful, and one that fled straight to the loins. "He is a follower of the Hedge Knight's exploits, you see, and you would disagree with him on that. I welcome him to his own favorites," Lady Lyanna maintained diplomatically. In past I have most avidly followed the Knight of the Morning. None better standard for gallantry would exist. Elinor nodded. Pray do not mention this to Lady Olenna. She hasn't any fondness for the Dornish. For one Dornishman in particular, Desmond corrected. The two shared a laugh. Ah, forgive me our jape, Lady Lyanna, it is a small thing. She received a timid smile in return. Lord Willas had mentioned Prince Oberyn as a great friend. Much to grandmother's distress, Desmond maintained. A burst of surprise ran down her spine. You are aware of the particulars. Lord Willas and I have discussed the subject but briefly. It surprises me, as Cousin Willas is ever so private with his affairs. Elinor flitted away for a fresh blanket as the other two helped Lyanna up. Tell us how many little secrets you charmed from him, and what shall my coin be for such a service? Lyanna teased back. I shall love you forever, Elinor offered. No, better yet, I shall tell you of all the little rooms that you may tease more secrets from my cousin from. This led to another startled burst of laughter. Mira's pale skin was flushed a deep red by now, but Lady Lyanna admirably held her composure. You shall take all the fun out of discovering them for myself, Lady Elinor. You shall call me either cousin or Elinor if you're to do us all the great favor of wedding Willas. Then I insist on the same intimacy for myself. As for secrets, I'll disappoint with the knowledge that your cousin is a rather dull soul. Dull. Cousin Margaery spoke of love letters, trysts in the woods. He's even sent my brothers to kidnap you. Only as by necessity, and with mine own brother acting chaperone, Lyanna explained. Her luminous eyes gleamed and she added, has Margaery spoken of her brother's efforts to birth direwolf cubs? Desmond mentally noted that the Lady Lyanna had a gift for storytelling as she narrated the fantastical and whimsical tale. This took most of the time necessary to dress the bride, followed by more light exchanged, wherein she adequately deflected any attention from herself. The red wine did learn of her closeness with her siblings, and that the Stark heir that had taught her to fight, but neither bit of information was particularly titillating. As with most of House Stark, Lyanna Snow presented a picture that was regimented, honorable, and inconceivably dull. Desmond was impressed. Her wits are unpolished but ready. Grandmother shall train her to reveal nothing in pretty words and aimless charm soon enough. After the dress had been fitted, and Desmond properly kicked her cousin when Elinor's hand lingered a mite too long on the curve of the lady's hip, they addressed the hair. As enticing as those curls would be in bed, it was the work of those soothing oils that it could be wrestled into a proper bun. A light silver powder was applied to draw attention to those uncommonly pretty eyes, as was thick paint to her lashes. Pink rouge to her cheeks and white powder along the bare neck and strip of collarbone still present. Each piece of jewelry was properly fitted, then the slippers carefully placed on. Last was the veil, made of lace so fine that it appeared spun out of strands of a spider's web. When it was done, they all stepped back and admired the blushing bride-to-be. You look, Desmond announced with the tone of a lady that had completed her task to the utmost satisfaction. Absolutely stunning. In her mind, the red wine lamented that she would be unable to taste the beauty for herself. It's truly a shame that Cousin Willas is such a selfish brat. 9 months from now, she would reiterate the complaint against her eldest cousin. If Willas wasn't so damn possessive, Desmond wouldn't have lamented the loss of such a beauty. If Willas hadn't dared to wed a bastard, Desmond wouldn't have risked a short dalliance with a handsome Ironborn. And if Willas needn't the privacy to wed on so remote an island, she needn't have waited 2 whole days to get her hands on moon tea leaves, lowering their effectiveness to a mere 8/10. Damn Willas. It's not too late to back out now, Robb whispered once Lyanna had been escorted to a side chamber with only her brother for company. The dark-haired girl laughed softly to herself. I think it is. We're here, I'm dressed. Willas awaits. Not to mention that your future good sister will make us all take long walks off a short pier. If we do anything to ruin her wedding, Robb added, inviting more laughter. Scared, there was a pause and then a soft breath. Yes, enough to run away. There was a gentle smile on Robb's face, one that gave her the strength to stick out her tongue. You wish, Lyanna answered. I do, the auburn-haired boy freely admitted. Sansa and Arya were always to be wed away, but you I had hoped to keep close. I had wished for the same, but I really do love him. Liara looked down at the fresh bouquet of white and blue roses, dotted with forget-me-nots, holly flowers and sprigs of lavender made for her. I'm sorry for bringing us into the great game. There was silence, then an answer spoken in consideration. For 27 years we had been playing. House Stark entered the game the moment that grandfather sent father to foster at the Vale. He hadn't prepared his children for it, and admittedly, father has not done the same for us, but your husband is, if nothing else, a knowledgeable player. He lacks experience. Liara said lowly. Experience is a pleasure that only time can afford, and knowledge is the currency to buy time. He will gain nothing if he should broker for war. He desired a future for his house, you needn't fault him that, Robb chided. It was a mistake, but when the time came for him to choose, he chose you. He chose you. A flutter appeared, light and low in her belly. You speak so kindly of my husband. Her elder brother, cousin by blood and twin by most any other measure, huffed. Don't remind me. The two fell into a peaceful silence that only they shared waiting moments before. The first 3 of the bells rang to summon the maiden, the mother, and the crone. It was the signal for the bride to step forward, so Liara kept her bouquet in her right hand and pushed the other through the sword arm of her brother to keep the father from attacking the bridegroom. With Robb stepping forward first, the curtains parted and her tiny, dim corner of the world was alit. Marguerite Tyrell had done an absolutely remarkable job. She did most of the room wallpapered to a muted gold with sketched roses rising from the floor. The narrow wall at the end of the procession of interspersed poplar and larch chairs was painted to a mural. In rich paints was a white wolf slept nestled in winter roses as a golden-eyed owl stood guard. A dozen iron chandeliers hung from the ceiling with long tapered scented candles, releasing a light wildflower scent. Tapestries and brocades proudly proclaimed the Tyrell house colors, but hints of red and black, as with the black piping for the brocade, stood for her own blood. A small dais stood for a handful of musicians to play, and the foremost left-center seat was reserved for a delineator to sketch the ceremony. Liara was gratified to find statues of sitting direwolves holding a rose between their paws on each corner of the room. For a private ceremony, the small hall was filled to the Marguerite had invited everyone within the castle, from the lowest scullery maid to the highest chatelane, and while the nobility skewed to youth, it was no less representative of the great houses of the Reach. Samwell beamed at her from his first-row seat next to his brother and Theon. This comprised of her family situation, as the rightmost side was taken by a bevy of attractive brunettes, with the occasional blonde or redhead thrown in. Woe betide her, Liara considered with humor, if her child was born with the dark tresses of House Stark. Alas, as marvelous as her good sister's work was, Liara was focused solely on the brilliance that Mace and Alarai Tyrell had brought into the world. Willas stood there in dark velvet and gold thread, his cane amiss but a polished oaken brace keeping him upright. There was a smile on his face, a promise in his eyes that robbed her of all her fear for stepping forward. And to think it all started with a ride. A gentle melody began to play, the tune unfamiliar to her, though it certainly held the strains of promise inherent to a ceremony of new beginnings. Robb led her forward gently. As often in her life, Liara followed. The tawny gold of her Rose Lord's eyes unraveled her, breaking a smile that would have others speak of radiance and joy in the bride. The Stark heir released her when they arrived to the stage, leaving her to Willas and a Septon, as he took his own seat beside Theon. Dickon Tarley unexpectedly whipped out a handkerchief, soon put to good use by a misty-eyed wolf. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Liara allowed the drone of words to fall by her ear, trusting Willas' movements to guide her to the trestle. He clasped both hands over hers, her own faintly nicked and calloused hands, covered by larger ones slightly less so and of a faintly golden tan from the sun. Strips of fabric dipped in tiny bowls of oil were wrapped around their entwined wrists, one each for the 7 gods, from a vibrant crimson for the warrior to a sedate brown for the crone. An assistant Septon in the yellow-striped robe of a novice hurried forward to move the trestle away as they patiently waited. Who stands for the kin's blessing? The Septon called aloud. Robb and Garland both stepped forward and each were given a goblet of spiced mead. The brunette knight came over to her, a welcoming grin present as he raised the cup to her lips. Lyanna closed her eyes and drank it all down, a sweet burning taste falling down her throat. Then the Septon turned to the honey-haired lord. "In the name of the Father, I ask you, will you treat your wife justly from this day till your last?" "I will," Willas answered softly. "In the name of the warrior, I ask you, will you defend her against all ills from this day till your last?" "I will." "In the name of the smith, I ask you, will you provide hearth and home for her to your own ability from this day till your last?" "I will." The man then turned to her, still looking a bit shell-shocked that he was selected for a ceremony between the heir to Highgarden and a northern bastard. "In the name of the mother, I ask you, will you obey your husband faithfully from this day till your last?" "I will." Lyanna wasn't all too keen on this part of the ceremony, but the Reach's association with the Seven made it a political necessity. "In the name of the maiden, I ask you, will you love him loyally, forsaking all others from this day till your last?" "I will." "In the name of the crone, I ask you, will you comfort him in sickness and ill from this day till your last?" "I will." "Then I evoke the stranger to forbear his judgment for many years to come. May you have good fortunes, blessed health and peace and plenty under the mercy of the Seven. I will now tie the final binding of man's notice to the holy matrimony of Willas of House Tyrell and Lyanna of House Stark. If any should protest, speak now or forever hold wump." The doors slammed open. Everyone turned to find an old lady hobbling in, a formidable guard at either end. People froze, unable to speak, as the Queen of Thorns made her way down the aisle. Robb nearly half rose himself from his seat before Theon wisely pulled him down. In the front row, Margaery, Garland and Loras all turned spectacular shades of pallid gray. Willas in return was remarkably calm. "Grandmother," he greeted pleasantly. Still in bindings, the Rose Lord's hands discreetly squeezed her own. Lyanna's heart, having beaten erratically 2 paces ahead, settled its rhythm. "I see that you didn't reserve a seat for me," Lady Olenna Tyrell sniffed. She used her cane to poke Garland. "Get up. You're young, you can afford to stand." Garland stood. Olenna took a seat. There was a silence for a minute before she sniffed disdainfully. The sound practically echoed in the chamber. "Well, get on with it. I'm not getting any younger." "Nobody's fool." Willas Tyrell promptly stepped on the Septon's foot to draw him out of his stupor. The man hurriedly complied. "As the gods have binded, let no man tear asunder," the Septon declared, and Lyanna Tyrell leaned in to kiss her husband. Olenna Tyrell had declared that there would be no bedding ceremony. All of the guests, even a most disappointed Elinor, had thus agreed. "Idiots," was the Queen of Thorns' concise summary of them as she put forth the effort to stand on her feet. Her old bones creaked in protest, as they always did, but her mind dismissed the complaints to be irate instead at the folly of youth. What consequences were they cowering from? Olenna could only hit so many shins with her walking stick after all. Childhood trauma should be forgotten by now. If they cannot handle their sweet grandmother, how will they face the likes of Lord Tywin or Lord Arryn? She despaired of how anything was to be done when she passed on. Her grandchildren were all bright and clever in their own ways, but it would be for naught if they needed someone to direct their every move. The gods knew her fool of a son wouldn't be able to do so, however fond she was of the boy. Of course, courage brings along its own set of problems. She was a hard woman. She could freely admit that, but even Olenna's heart warmed as Willas leaned in to press a kiss on his bride's head. The girl's cousin couldn't wait patiently for the honey-haired lord to release the woman, instead pulling her away for a tight embrace of his own. It was fiercely returned with an affection that Olenna was not unaccustomed to but was altogether unseemly in public. Maybe it's time that the loyalists stop blaming Lyanna Stark for stealing away Rhaegar's heart. The she-wolf fell, as my own grandson did, to the baffling charm of the dragons. The scroll Samwell had brought her revealed the identity of Willas' bride, and it hadn't made her any more pleased with her grandson's choice. The Queen of Thorns had hopes, many hopes, of putting a grandchild of hers on the throne one day. She had expected it to be by Margaery's marriage to the crown prince, a union she could at least stomach, even if the boy was of Tywin's get. The lions and stags held the throne now, and they were a formidable pair, even if Robb Stark's presence meant the wolves and trouts could be swayed away. Regardless, those allies stirred far from their borders, and the scorpions, loyalists all, would balk at the daughter of a she-wolf and the son of a steward. A generation lost to Olenna's gamble, Olenna lamented. I'll be dead before their son is a man grown and the Tyrells can mount an offense for a crown. Who knows where we'll be 2 decades from now? The melancholy squeezed her heart for a moment longer before the old woman snorted. 2 decades from now she would be dead. As would Tywin, Doran, Hoster, Jon, and all of the nosy busybodies keeping the realm together now. The decisions they made may still influence the kingdoms for better or for worse, but they wouldn't be there to face the consequences of them. God's willing. Her children and grandchildren and mayhaps even great-grandchildren would be living. They would chart the course of Tyrell ambition. Willas would be the one to take the reins of their house, with a red-scaled dragon by his side and a direwolf of all particulars. The white-furred pup had even made Olenna stop and stare briefly in his home. A reckless, absurd, short-sighted gamble this may be, but if her grandson chose to roll the dice, then how could she stop him? That is, she amended briefly, how can I do so without breaking the stupid boy's heart? Olenna had come prepared. In her trunks remained 2 packets of mixed herbs. One she knew would be the more prudent path to take. Not yet certain of her decision, the old lady hobbled forward. Willas looked up at the soft tip-tap of the cane. The earnest smile of a boy present on a lord's face. I'm glad you're here, grandmother. It was a trial, I assure you. Olenna permitted a swift kiss to her cheek. You did a wonderful job on the ceremony, Margaery. Her granddaughter practically beamed. Margie looked as lovely as she always did in her sky-blue dress and cinnamon hair pulled into a plaited bun, but it was the satisfaction of a plot pulled off that added the glow to her skin. Thank you, grandmother. I trust your brothers made themselves useful. Margaery nodded piously. I couldn't have done this without Willa's checkbook, grandmother. Good, good. Olenna eyed the crowd of nobles and small folk ambling around the room. The joyful atmosphere of the wedding and the arrival of a buffet appeared to have dispelled much of the awkward air existing between the classes. Oysters, never did like them. By now, the newly named Lady Lyanna Tyrell had disentangled herself from her cousin's arms. The dark-haired bastard with simultaneously the most deadly and the most valuable bloodline in Westeros brought the auburn-haired Stark along with her. A polite if nervous smile was offered to her. The Queen of Thorns took a moment to study the girl. She had been lovely before, the bastard of Ned Stark and an unknown woman that most presumed to be Ashara Dane. It was now with her bloodline in mind that the hints of the inhuman beauty the Targaryens possessed came to the fore. Those violet-speckled silver eyes, the bow-shaped lips curved knowingly by nature, the sweet milk skin that wouldn't bend to any force of light. The Silver Prince had worn those once. They were brought to even greater advantage by her granddaughters, the alone rare beauty that the gods alone would grant. Lyanna Stark had been a pretty enough girl, but if she'd had her daughter's beauty, the minstrels wouldn't need to aggrandize their songs. Lady Olenna, welcome. Have I thanked you for anything? You have not, but I shall forgive you the lapse. The smile was all Rhaella, the little of her company that Olenna had enjoyed before Aerys snuffed that spirit out. I've been informed by no less than 3 roses that my husband fears the marriage band and that I have done a great service to House Tyrell by charming him into one. None more so than the service we grant you, I'm told, Olenna answered dryly. A bride price. The North appreciates House Tyrell's generosity. Robb Stark spoke up. Lady Olenna, you look quite lovely this evening. I fear for the future of your house, boy, if an old harridan attracts you. Olenna ignored the resulting splutter as she turned to Margaery. Take my new granddaughter and mingle with the guests, dear. Willas and I must talk. Yes, grandmother. Margaery dutifully grabbed her good sister, and had even the kindness to take Lord Robb, sweet-natured girl that she was, and escort them away. Olenna made a mental note to discourage any aspirations in that direction. Now that Willas brought a bastard to Highgarden, Margaery would have to wed within the reach. Willas offered her a hand, Olenna took it. She waited until they had moved down the hallway and into a prepared room, where her own trunks had been placed, gratifyingly enough. Margaery was such a talented girl. I do hope you know that your selfishness ruined your sister's marriage prospects. I've spoken to Margaery on the subject, and she has agreed that suitable matches may be found closer to home. Her grandson offered a sheepish smile. The last time she had seen this, Olenna learned of his budding friendship with that licentious, irresponsible ass that cost him a working leg. You may be upset with me, grandmother. A fortune in foodstuffs, a bastard wife, a secret wedding, Olenna listed off. I cannot imagine why I shouldn't be bursting in pride for you. I was following family tradition. Keep in mind that I ran Prince Daeron away from my bed grandson. My wife remains a maiden, thank you. Willas paused. I mean to relieve her of the title when our discussion is done. Let us not tarry. Lyanna Stark left willingly. Her eyebrows rose. Montford would be pleased to know his words true then, as pleased as he can be with the loss of his beloved dynasty. They wed in a private ceremony. Lyanna is a red dragon, not a black one. There are papers in my possession to corroborate this, and Ned Stark likely has more. Robb Stark is aware as well. To the best of my knowledge, no one else in the family is. For this, Olenna had to sit down. Her darling granddaughter had left a carafe of watered-down wine and 2 goblets on the bedside table for her. It took her a few moments to offer an answer. Then I will be upset with you because... Yes, that was certainly a sheepish expression on her grandson's face, as well as averted eyes and a dusting of pink. I promised Lyanna not to start a war. Of course you did. Olenna was resigned. Laura's was bad enough, but Luther's sentimentality was supposed to have skipped Willa's. Let your wife have the peace she will then. I'll draw up a loan for the crown to legitimize her as a Tyrell instead of a Stark. With any luck, the stag'll drink the gold down at his favorite tavern. More wine and pheasant can only bring the king pleasure. Willas said agreeably. By your leave then, grandmother. She waved her hand in permission. Ravish your dragon then, you'll be the first person to do so for well over a decade. Once her firstborn, and though she would never say it, favorite grandson left, Olenna stood up on cracked knees. She poured another cup full of dark red wine. Then she made her way to her trunk to fetch the powders. Willas was a man grown, but occasionally a grandmother was needed to push matters along their proper way. Ex-Lord Eddard Stark expected over 6 children and their pet direwolves to happily greet him as he rode through the gates. He would hug all of his daughters, swing Rickon into the air, muss Bran's hair, and ask after Robb's and Theon's lessons. Cat would be there with a proper kiss on the cheek, and an account of all that had occurred in his brief absence. It was the happy sort of reunion that Ned had accustomed himself to after all these years, and was now wondering if he took for granted. Nothing against Maester Luwin, but he did feel some grumpiness over being welcomed by the wizened learned man instead of his family. The worried look on Luwin's face did nothing to assure him either. Maester, where is my family? Inside, my lord, the old man answered swiftly as he stepped down. Lady Catelyn is questioning them now. It appears that young Lords Robb and Theon as well as Lady Lyanna left the castle early this morn. They'd taken provisions for a long journey. The children insist that they left willingly but would not reveal where they'd gone. Ned stared at him in blank astonishment. What? The Maester began to repeat himself, but the Stark made a cutting gesture to silence him. No, I've heard your words. My children left the castle. Why? We're not certain, my lord, the Maester coughed. Lady Sansa insists that it is for a necessary trip. The others refuse to talk at all. Of course they do. Ned offered a dour look in response. Have men been sent out to scour the fields? Yes. Then please excuse me, Maester. I must speak to my children. Leaving his bridle in a pale-faced guard's hand, Ned turned and took long strides towards his home. It was past nightfall now. Worry niggled him at where his children could be and whatever ills may prey on them in the darkness. Nonetheless, the knowledge that they'd gone willingly, and more importantly together, gave him some comfort. He hadn't stepped into the great hall for a moment before seeing that same comfort lacking on his wife's face. The torches of the great hall cast her dark red hair into a fiery glow. Her lovely face was cast into sharpened lines of worry, as she regarded the 4 little figures sitting in a duckling row, 3 with bowed heads and the last Rickon nodding off on the bench. Tin plates had been set before them with simple bread and stew, most of it finished. Cat looked up when he came in, managing a thin, strained smile as he walked up to her. "My brood is half missing tonight," Ned commented, getting down to one knee and smiling slightly. "Hello, children." He received a few sheepish welcomes in return. Rickon put forth the greatest effort to open his eyelids and smile at his father. "Do you know where your brothers and sister are?" Ned inquired softly. Bran, who had apparently been elected the spokesman, answered, "We're not certain. Do you have an idea?" This one didn't evoke a reply, but Bran did guiltedly look away. Arya shuffled a little in her seat. He turned to his most obedient, docile daughter. "Sansa." It shouldn't have made him as proud as it did when those river-blue Tully eyes turned to him with all of the stone-cold iciness of a Stark. "Father, is there anything that you would like to say?" "No, father." Ned stood back up and studied his children again, then he exchanged a brief look with his life. "Rickon." "Sweeterling, you must be tired." Cat stepped forward. "Why don't we get you prepared for bed? Come, Bran. You shall help me." "Arya, you've spilled soup onto your frock," Ned added measuredly. "Please go and clean yourself." The children exchanged panicked looks, no doubt questioning if any of the others would crack under this divide-and-conquer strategy. Arya briefly glared at her sister, receiving an equally frustrated look in response. Still, without any good reason to refuse, Bran and Arya sullenly stood to follow their orders. Rickon happily raised his hands up to his mother. Readying for bed meant bath time. The quiet wolf took a seat beside Sansa. "Your mother and I are very worried, Sansa, you know that, don't you?" Sansa stayed silent. "Your siblings are gifted warriors, but none have lengthy experience in the wilderness. There are many dangers, they're wild animals, lawless bandits, even the land itself. Are they prepared for that?" Sansa stayed silent. "Has anyone asked you to keep silent?" "We won't be upset if you answer yes." Sansa fidgeted a little. Ned pressed on. "Your mother and I only want the best for you all. If Robb or Lyanna are in any trouble, then we want to help." At her uncertain look, he coaxed. "They prepared provisions for a journey." He received an unsure nod, the knowledge already well known. "Do you know when they'll be back?" A half shrug now. "Maybe a sennight. By horse alone that doesn't take you far," Ned concluded. "It could take them up to the wall perhaps, but why would they sneak around to visit their uncle Benjen? Unless Robb or Theon meant to join the watch, ascribing the latter at least to a life of celibacy he couldn't possibly handle. They will all come back, won't they, Sansa?" A twist of her fingers and an icy hand skittered across his spine. His children, they weren't running away, surely. Robb was proud to be the heir to Winterfell. He was dedicated to learning of his duties. He wouldn't have fled the position, and he certainly wouldn't have allowed Lyanna to run away either. "Is Theon trying to escape?" A startled glance. "What do you mean, father?" "Theon," Ned spoke quietly, urgently. "Is he trying to flee? He must stay with a Stark, Sansa. The king demands it, else Theon'll suffer a harsher punishment than to be a hostage." "No." Sansa's blue eyes were wide now in fright. "It's not Theon, father." The next likely alternative presented itself, and Ned's heart grew heavy. His eldest daughter running from home, why would she do so? She had been raised here, loved, protected. What could push her to leave, and Robb to help her? "Why would your sister leave Winterfell?" "It's for the best, father." Sansa's blue eyes were earnest. "Even Robb agrees, and you know he would never suffer her absence if it truly wouldn't make her happy." The quiet wolf's silent litany of self-reprobations was broken by these heartfelt words. They stirred his concern instead in an entirely different direction. His eldest two children shared a closeness that had often been attributed by the servants to Brandon and Lyanna. He would have ascribed Robb instead to Benjen, the level-headed, purely northern wolf that shared a faith in his sister as a person instead of a woman. Benjen had encouraged Lyanna to leave once upon a time too, to flee straight into a gods-be-damned moron's arms. But Lyanna had been free-spirited and blithe. Lyanna was the most circumspect child he had. "Sansa, please tell me that your sister hasn't ridden south to wed Willas Tyrell." He received a wide-eyed look of disbelief for that comment. It would have reassured him, except a moment later. Lyanna rode south with Sir Loras to marry his brother Lord Willas. Willas Tyrell. It took a moment to recall the polite, intelligent, well-spoken young man he had met at Highgarden. Of all the people he would have suspected to lure his eldest into a spurious betrothal, Willas Tyrell would have been last on the list. The man hadn't shown any partiality to his daughter at all. Even Rhaegar had given Lyanna that blasted flower crown. His daughter nodded eagerly. He was tempted to press her for answers truly Willas Tyrell, but Ned moved on. It didn't matter which dishonorable lordling had stolen a daughter from him. The point was that House Stark had lost a daughter again. Sansa Stark, you will reveal everything you know about this matter to me right now. His gentle, obedient, well-behaved daughter considered the fatherly edict for a moment and then gracefully shrugged. The ship likely left with them by now anyway. After this, she narrated a courtship that was equal parts maddening and impressive. Willas Tyrell was one frustratingly clever man, managing to orchestrate this entire courtship and alliance negotiation under his nose for the better part of 7 moons. He had surpassed the Silver Prince on nerve alone. Not even Rhaegar had the audacity to visit his sister in the Wolfswood or hold the North hostage to Winter for a marriage proposal. That it was dishonorable was evident, that it was effective no less so. And your brother went along to give her away? Ned asked to Sansa's cheerful nod. Show me the letter, Sansa. The father in Ned Stark was so furious right now that it wanted nothing more than to grab ice and pay the Rose lordling a visit. The Stark lord in him temporarily blunted that notion, reminding him that when he arrived south, punishing Willas Tyrell properly would fall under the banner of kinslaying. Instead, the icy reproach of his forefathers maintained that the North had been mistakenly dragged into one war already, and lest he want Robert provoked by the echo of another she-wolf taken from her father's home for a marriage cloak, he'd best clear the account. It galled him to lend support to Willas Tyrell's despicable actions, but even Ned would allow that the honorable approach was foolish. Ned would meet the Tyrell heir again, one day, though, and there was a lot that drew the line before kinslaying. In the south, lords and ladies were afforded their own set of rooms. It was not a practice Lyanna was all too familiar with but drew some comfort from as she waited for her wedding night. Willas had offered his own bedroom for the deed, allowing her as much time as necessary to prepare. It hadn't been all that much truly. The bath was prepared and the ladies stripped her carefully of her bridal gown, offering half-jest advice that she attentively absorbed nonetheless. The silken dressing gown left behind by a winking Elinor had brought a blush to her cheeks, but despite her nerves, she hadn't any plans to avoid the bedding. Her curiosity was to her benefit here, and while she'd heard of pain initially, her husband had been most attentive and gentle in his other ministrations. Had Lyanna been a more honest woman, she would admit that she was looking forward to the task. The she-wolf would have headed out to experience it now had it not been for the goblet before her. It had been left behind by a servant bringing in her nightgown, filled with arbor red wine. There was an evident viscosity to the liquid that the healer in her recognized from herbal lessons. The scent of red raspberry leaf was overwhelming. It had come with a placard, "You play in the great game now." Lyanna closed her eyes and pictured her family. Her father, honorable, dutiful, and ever there to guard and guide her. Uncle Benjen, too clever by half but a steadfast keeper of childhood foibles. Ever sibling from Robb, her reliable eldest brother to Rickon. Her wild youngest one. Her unblooded brother, Theon, who dared too much and feared too little. Even Lady Stark, a constant presence of mute disapproval in her childhood, played a role. They determined her decision for her. Lyanna leant forward, picked the goblet up and determinedly tipped it over. Purplish red wine poured out, staining her snowlit skin blotchy pink but abstaining permanently from her lips. Honestly, her new good family's relentless march to ever more power and influence could not be healthy. If the gods wanted her to have children, then she would, but Lyanna certainly refused to be tricked into it. To speak those silly Southron words in their silly Southron court, Lyanna's lips quirked. How Stark endured. She may have a dragon's blood and a rose's banner, but it was the wolves that nursed her from childhood. The Starks were survivors, and whatever challenges that awaited her at Highgarden, she had chosen to accept them. To accept Willas. I made my bed and now I desire to lie in it.